Robert Stubblefield and Dr. Ray Shelton and Steve Richins. And today we're continuing the adventures in the Anteroom, and we're focused on vector. Volition is a vector. And this is not in OPAR, affectionately, the Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. So this is an idea that Lee is going to elucidate us about. So Lee, over to you.
Okay. Yes, the idea of volition as a vector is not an OPAR idea. It's something I came up with as an elaboration from OPAR, shall we say. Before we get to that, I do want to go back in the chapter. There's a few preliminaries. I do want to discuss a paragraph, and then we'll talk about volition as a vector. And then I would like to come back to the chapter and talk about volition as axiomatic. We'll finish that depending on time, which is a very important idea, in my opinion. And that's in the chapter, the OPAR chapter. But anyway, as a preliminary, if you have page 66 in front of you of OPAR, which I have in the Kindle version, there is a paragraph that starts with the words, "again, however." Now I'm going to go right to the second sentence of that paragraph. Actually, is that the one? You know what? I want to, let's see, man. I'm going to skip that actually and if you go to 67, and on page 67, it says, one of the paragraphs, depending on what version you're using, it may be near the bottom. It says on page 67, "in the realm of physical action." You see that paragraph where it says "in the realm of physical action"? Okay. Man's choice is twofold.
Yes.
Okay. Because I want to unpack this a little bit, and Bob may be helpful here because he studied this carefully. And Dr. Peikoff says, first he must choose through a process of thought or non-thought the ideas and values that will comprise his mind's content. Now let me stop there because I want to do some cognitive refueling here, some careful examination of key concepts and try to activate some knowledge about key concepts, which I believe is necessary to keep thinking moving forward. We will get back to that later. So here, one key concept here is choose. He says, first he must choose the ideas and values. Now, what I wonder is why use the term choose here as a like, I'm going to choose this rather than that. I'm choosing between alternatives rather than identify. In what sense are you choosing rather than identifying? Because I think identifying is more what's going on here, I would say, but he used the term choose. What do you think, Bob? What do you think the reason for using choice there? Do you have any thought about that?
Well, just the loose thought that there are many options, and therefore choice seems to be a way to go among options.
I think it's a
Okay.
parallel
Yep.
of the well, I, I well, I'll call it a mistake. The the mistaken belief that focus is generic.
Okay, it may have something to do. I mean, as I look at it and thinking about it, I can see something for choice here in that you have a lot of ideas and values, and you're going to, at any one moment, you're not going to be acting and thinking about all of them at once. So in that sense, out of a panoply of, a large number of values you're choosing. Again, I would say it's more like you're identifying the value that's relevant at the particular time. It's a cognitive process more, to me, more than a choice. But maybe I'm putting too much emphasis on that word.
Well, Lee,
Yeah.
if I may,
Mm-hmm.
when I read this, it is not clear to me if, when he says choose, if what he is saying is he's identifying background ideas and values that already exist and set the context, which
Yeah.
to me seems to be the natural reading. Or is this supposed to be limited strictly to, okay, I'm going to be in focus, and so I need to choose a value or an idea? And that seems to me an unnatural reading, and omitting all sorts of other ideas that come into drawing our attention, to raising awareness, to focusing. It's a very odd sentence to me, without any
Okay, it's at least it's a hard.
explanation.
Maybe I should have read that first sentence where he limits the context that we're speaking of, rather than starting in the second sentence. First sentence says, "In the realm of physical action, man's choice is twofold." So that suggests we've already got ideas, and we're now at the stage of translating ideas into action. And from that standpoint, he's talking about values that have already been formed, and you're kind of picking through those. But I still like identify, but it's anyway. I think we can leave it at that for now, unless anybody else wants to throw in some more on that. We choose the ideas and values that will comprise his mind's content. Well, that's a slightly non-standard use of the word comprise, but that isn't important, I guess. Then he must choose to act on these ideas and values to keep them operative as his guide amid all the vicissitudes of daily life. He must choose what to think. And again, I would word that a little differently. You're choosing what to think about. You don't actually choose your thoughts. The thoughts come in, when you choose to think, thoughts come into your mind. Sam Harris is actually correct for once about that much, that you don't actually choose the next thing, the next thought that comes into your mind. You're not choosing that. So I would say you choose what to think about. And then he must choose what to practice what he preaches. So there's a couple of steps there. Dr. Peikoff is saying that you choose your thought content and then you choose to act based on that. I tend to think that most of the time, James's ideomotor theory of action is correct. That actually actions follow very directly from thoughts, without further choice on your part, choice activity, as long as there's a thought in your mind which is unopposed. What stops you from acting on thoughts is that there is more than in most of the times during the day when you're thinking about things, there's more than one value and more than one thought pulling at you at once. And it's only when you get down to a singular idea that's really driving you, then you just do it. James has a brilliant section in the Principles of Psychology. I think it's great anyway, where he suggests introspecting on this. And this is a tough introspection. You have to be a good introspector to do this well, in my opinion. It's when you get up in the morning, when you're lying in bed, and I don't know about you, this especially works best in the winter. You're lying in bed, and I like it cold in the room. In the room, with lots of covers or something like that. That's the way I like it. Other people may like it differently, but that makes it hard to get up. When you get up in the morning and the alarm goes off, you're going to get up. I don't want to get up usually right away. I want to stay there for a while. It's nice and warm. It's nice and comfortable. I'm going to have to get up and I have to do stuff and the various thoughts swirl around in my mind. This is hard to introspect early in the morning, but try this. The thoughts swirl around in my mind. I've got to get up. I've got things to do today. I've got to do this. I'm going to this event. it's early in the morning. If I don't get up now, I won't be able to get ready fast. And at the same time, there are these thoughts of, I like it in here. It's nice and warm. It's nice and comfortable. And these thoughts kind of are all swirling around, I'm frozen for a little while, not frozen cold, but frozen from. And at some point, though, the idea of I have to get up takes control. At some point it becomes a stronger thought, and I find myself just getting up. That's the key thing to try to introspect. Try to introspect that. In other words, it's not like I make some extra effort. It's that these thoughts are going around in my mind, and at some point, the thought that I have to get up really becomes dominant. And when that happens, boom, I get up without further volitional effort. Now, that's my introspection. Other people, your mileage may vary. That's the thing about introspection is everybody, there are individual differences, and they are hard to negotiate or judge. But anyway, try that sometime. Try that in the morning and see what you come up with. I come up with the idea that at some point I just get up. And that's after there's some volitional effort involved, thinking about what I have to do today, stuff like that. There is some volitional effort, but the volitional effort is about the mental content. It's not so directly about the action itself. Once I've got the mental content lined up and I got that idea dominant in my mind and I need to get up, bam, it happens. You have anything like that, Ray? Or do you know what I'm talking about? Or
Nope.
does that seem
Nope.
crazy to you?
That seems entirely crazy to me.
All right. See, that's the way introspection. That's the problem. Yeah.
It may be that there is not a lot going upstairs here, but I have talked to people over many years, and they seem to have this running, talking dialogue like you're reporting. And I never seem to experience that. To me, it's more like it's just like this. I enjoy a glass of juice. I see it. I reach over. I take it. It's just that. There's no effort involved. There's no choosing and like I'm now going to choose to drink. I see it. I drink. If it's time to go, I look at the clock. It's time to go. I go. This inner dialogue of choice, which many people have reported to me, and they seem to engage in a lot of deliberation. I don't experience that at all.
Okay, I don't think I think we're not as far apart as you may think, because it wasn't deliberation I was talking about so much as there are these ideas. Most of that's why I wanted to focus on this thing about getting out of bed, because that really is an unusual situation where there's, for me at least, a lot of conflicting goals. Mm-hmm. I want to stay warm. I want to stay comfortable. I don't really want to do what I have to do, but at the same time, I know I've got to get up and I know I've got to do what I have to do. And eventually that idea becomes powerful enough. Then it just happens. Otherwise, most of the day, most of the actions, I think, follow the way you said, which is they just follow because in those cases, the idea, whatever the idea is dominant without opposition, and then the action just follows without any extra. The point is, it doesn't take any extra will. I don't necessarily believe, I guess I'm trying to say here, so I don't necessarily believe in this extra active will. And I think you're saying the same thing, Ray. I think that there's an extra active will involved, that you have to, make yourself do stuff. Once you have the clear idea in your mind of what it is you want to do or need to do or are going to do, that it happens. And there isn't some further active will or further active deliberation necessary to do it. You just go about your business.
Yeah.
So I think maybe we're in agreement. I'm just looking at this case that James proposes, which is unusual in that you've got these conflicting ideas. It can happen other times. Once the conflict is resolved in your mind, you get up. So you're just not. You don't have very many conflicts.
I have zero conflicts.
Oh yeah, zero conflicts.
Zero conflicts.
All right. Try this in the morning though, on some cold, and make sure it's cold, a little bit cold.
No, it's just get up and get on with it.
Well, I'm suggesting give it a try introspectively. Try it. I'll leave it at that. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead though. Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
Well, I was going to say, this issue of will and all that sort of thing, I've always been very fascinated by people who've gone through basically soldiers who've gone through extremely harsh conditions. And then they come back to civilian life. And they seem amazed that everybody else seems confused or paralyzed or unable to make decisions. They just seem, this is what needs to be done. We just do it. That's it. People who come from situations of extreme deprivation, where what needs to be done is obvious. It's immediate and it's obvious, and there's no long deliberation of the things that need to be done.
Okay.
Versus,
sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say versus other people who come from situations that aren't like that and find themselves deeply conflicted about life choices or what needs to be done during the day and so forth and so on. And people who come from the military, they just get up and make the bed. That's what they do. There's no deliberation of, oh, should I get up? It's the alarm goes off, you get up, you make the bed, that's what you do. And you go on to the next thing. Versus people who seem to struggle with this. And this is completely off topic, but I'm just going to throw it out there and leave it for another time, is that I find objectivists, or people who say they're objectivists, and there seems to be a class distinction between people who come from wealthy backgrounds, easy backgrounds, and people who come from the lower classes, how they approach a lot of these different complex ideas, not only from epistemology, but all the way up to politics. I have found people who live in gated communities, live in wealthy neighborhoods, have a very particular and almost uniform view of certain political events. And those people who come from the very bottom, who have had to struggle in life, who've been hungry, have had very difficult lives, also seem to have a very uniform, almost entirely diametrically opposed view to these same political viewpoints. And this reminds me of that, this whole idea of constantly making these choices. Perhaps Leonard is speaking implicitly, but my day is not a series of walking around A or B, A or B, A, B, or C. That's not how I experience life.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if anybody said that. Actually, I have heard people. I can think of one philosopher,
yeah.
but I don't want to name him right now.
No names.
But I can think of one who said something like that. He said every 3 seconds you have to bring yourself back into what you're doing, which I think is nonsense. So I don't really think I'm disagreeing, because I wasn't saying this is something that happens all the time. Now, the military example, though, that's an extreme example, because those people, especially if they're Marines or something, well, maybe anywhere where you have basic training, the whole point of the training is to just get a whole bunch of stuff automatized and leave the thinking to the officers who will do it badly, but leave it to them and just do what they tell you. The whole point of the military training is to become obedient. So that's a different.
Then the orders coming down back in civilian life, how they operate, and their wives are baffled by their husbands' behaviors.
Well, they've automatized things have become automatized a certain way, and they've been told not. And their training is they're telling them not to think, in effect, and that's might be right for that kind of circumstance. It's not right all the time, though. Thinking is actually a good thing. And in some cases, you got to know when to do it. But you can't spend your life lost in thought, or you'll fall into the philosopher's well if you do that. So we know that. But thinking anyway. So I'm not disagreeing with you, but I do think there are cases. Actually, the whole point of the example is to show that that there is ideomotor action, that there's action that just follows directly without some further act of will, that's some extra act of will, after you have decided at some point, it doesn't have to be at that moment. At some earlier point, you decided what to do. The action will follow naturally. So I think we're not not too far apart, I think. Anyway, maybe we'll take up that class point another time if you want to pursue that further, because I do have a certain counter to that, but let's pursue that further on another a little more political. We don't do politics as much, and maybe with you we could do some more politics. All right, I'm going to go ahead here. Let's see where I was. As another thing, another preliminary I wanted to get, and we're still in preliminaries here. Page 68. The contents of one choice could always have gone in the opposite direction. The choice to focus could have been the choice not to focus, and vice versa. But the action itself, the fact of choosing as such in one direction or the other, is unavoidable. Now, I've heard this from in many times from objectivist sources, but I'm not sure that this takes enough account of mere drift, where you sit there and you don't choose anything. I mean, people do say, it's kind of a polemic, to say, well, not choosing is really a choice. And in a sense, that's true. But it's not a choice in the sense of you consciously decided. You're just sitting there and you're drifting. You're not doing anything. You're not choosing. Whereas when you choose to think, that's definitely a choice. And when you choose to avoid thinking, or to think in some direction you shouldn't go, which is what that usually is, that's evasion, and that's an act. But there is something that even objectivist recognizes as drift, and that's not a choice in the same sense. I mean, you can say it's a choice, but it really isn't. You must continually choose between focus and non-focus. You can default on that. Since man is an entity of a certain kind, since his brain and consciousness possess a certain identity, he must act in a certain way. Well, what is that certain way? Because there is an action of just sitting there doing nothing. I think that's a possible, you can call that it's inaction. If you want to call it an action, if you want to call it a choice, do so. But you have to recognize that there's a kind of a third category between choosing to think and evading and not choosing and just sitting there. I just want to, I guess, make that point. Bob Bob still here? I don't know. He may have gone.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think he's gone to his appointment.
I think he's gone to somewhere. Okay. So we're coming to, I want to come back to this chapter a little bit in a while, but I want to leave it now and talk about what I call volition as a vector. It's a metaphorical term. It's not literally a vector, because a vector is a quantity with a magnitude and a direction. And that direction, if it's in space, would be expressed in terms of the angles, or usually. And you can't do that with thinking. I can't define a space in which I could have an angle, a vector at a particular angle from an axis or something. So it's not exactly a vector, and you can't perform, as far as I know, I have to think about this, but you can't perform it vector addition or vector multiplication or any of the mathematical operations. So it's a metaphor. But metaphorically, here's the idea. First of all, the standard approach in objectivism is to say that free will is basically a two-stage process. And we did discuss this a little bit last time, that first there's a primary choice to focus, to get your mind in gear, to take the reins, to get behind the wheel. Or the metaphor I like to use sometimes is the manager gets behind his desk as the manager of the company. Okay, those are the metaphors. And then after you do that, then you decide, the manager does something, the horse, you get the horse to go somewhere, you get the car to drive down the road, and so that they're sequential actions, which those metaphors suggest, actually. But I don't think that's what happens. I think it is indeed like visual perception. And the correct visual perception metaphor is that you always, when you focus your eyes, you always focus your eyes on something. Not, I can't focus on Steve at the moment because he's out of focus.
He's
But when he
definitely out of
comes back
focus.
into focus, which he will in a second, there he is. I can focus my eyes on him, but you cannot focus generically. And I don't believe in generic focus in conceptual matters either. My introspection, and we're back to introspection again, because that's where we have to go with these matters. There's really nowhere else to start. My introspection is when I get up in the morning and I've gotten out of bed by ideomotor action. Um, I don't say to myself, "Okay, I'm going to be in focus now. I'm going to be in focus today. I'm going to be focused on reality today." I don't do that. Okay, once in a while when I'm in a philosophical mood, I might say, you know, let's get real here. I might do that once, sort of something of that sort. But generally speaking, what I do when I get up in the morning is just, and this is what Ray said, so I'm agreeing with Ray now. Well,
Yep.
wonders never cease. I get up and I just go about my business. I do my stuff. I think about things, and whenever I exert mental effort, the mental effort is always exerted on something. There is no act of focusing that is preceding and distinct from the sustaining of attention on a particular object. I just go about my business. Every volitional act is primary act and secondary act combined. Those things occur together. There is the primary act of exerting mental effort, and that is the free choice of the free and free will. That's the thing that you do that is not subject to antecedent causation. Is exerting mental effort. You just do it. That's all. That's a philosophical primary act. You just do it, but it's always focused on something. The something it's focused on, that is subject to antecedent causation of your values, your present purposes, your knowledge, and there is something I call the skill of will. There is a skill involved in getting your will on the appropriate object and getting your will to keep your thinking moving. That is actually a skill that some of us teach, the skill of will. And one of the important aspects of that is what I call cognitive refueling. You have to knowledge is both the product and the fuel of thinking. A thought process needs a continuing stream of knowledge to keep it going. And that has to be done. And that's a skill. There is a skill of doing that intentionally. Yeah, you get some knowledge automatically, but not enough to sustain the process. And just trying hard doesn't do it. So, I've given examples of this, I think, before, but let's try baseball. Ray, you know anything about baseball?
Absolutely nothing.
Okay, that's probably enough. Let's find out. How many outs are there in an inning?
Okay, 3.
Yeah, 3. That's what people say.
3.
I always say 3. However,
It's probably
if
6 if you go with both teams.
if you take a moment to activate the knowledge that doesn't necessarily come automatically, because even people that know baseball often say 3, because the right knowledge does not automatically come to mind just from the occurrence of the word. But if you take a moment to step back and do a little cognitive refueling and realize, hey, wait a minute, inning is a key concept here. What else do I know? What else do I know about inning? That's a basic, important question. And you'll know that there are 2 teams involved and that each team has 3 outs. Then you get the right answer, 6. I have a whole bunch of these examples. I just decided I'd throw out that one because it's an easy one. And you worked perfectly on it, Ray. It was perfect. Didn't have to know anything, but you don't have to have technical knowledge of baseball. And people that have technical knowledge of baseball still frequently make the mistake. Not everybody, but they still frequently make that mistake. So there's a skill involved in activating the knowledge that you need to drive a particular thought process forward. Okay, so that's the basic idea, that there's a mental effort of attention, And that pure mental effort is a free act, not subject to antecedent causation. If it were subject to antecedent causation, we would be into the contradiction of determinism, which we are going to get back to uh, soon. We'll get back to that shortly. And we would not be able to have, uh, uh, we wouldn't be able to be objective if you can't choose to basically increase your the evidence that you're looking at, to increase the context of knowledge from which you are drawing your conclusion. If you can't increase that by choice, if you can't do that, if that's controlled by antecedent factors, you cannot be objective in your judgments. So that's the free part. But the direction, where you go exactly, um, that is partly determined by your choice, partly determined by your previous choices that you made in your life to exert effort, and also by knowledge, values, and as I said, skill. There are many factors that go into exactly where your attention is directed. So, to be a little more precise about it, um, in your consciousness, you can't choose to think about something unless you have some awareness of that something. You can't choose to think of something that's outside of your consciousness. So you are, as far as conceptual material, you have to depend on your subconscious to throw up. That's the right word. To throw up is not right. To to
Bring up.
activate, bring up. That's better. To bring up into your consciousness some ideas, some possible objects of thought from which you will choose, and that's what happens. And you have in consciousness, it's very important to realize that there is both a fringe and a focus of consciousness. There's not just one thing in consciousness. There is usually one thing in the focus, and there are some fringe ideas that are less clear in your mind and are more fleeting. But you can grab onto one of those things. You can choose, so you have some choice about what to focus on, but only within what you've been given, and what you've been given by the subconscious is partly under the control of your past learning and your values, things that
Lee,
other factors. Yes.
Lee, can I interrupt here? It's
Sure.
interesting that you use the word focus and fringe, because I think that what we're really talking about here is a process. And in reading Leonard and speaking to other objectivists, it often comes across it's as if they're looking at a series of photographs in their discussion of this happens, choice, then this happens, choice, then this happens, when to me, we're in the midst of a flowing stream of information and sites that are flowing past us. And this is a process, not an iterated series. You're looking at a unified process across time. And I have listened to other objectivists who might respond to what you're saying when you say, okay, there are these other factors that are coming in, there's your previous context and so forth and so on. And they want to wrangle over, are these other factors, are these previous value causes or not causes, and seem to get stuck up in trying to attach a label such that free will is almost a supernatural phenomenon, rather than the phrase that Ayn used, and I'm going to mangle it, about the human mind is not this plastic thing that can be twisted and molded into anything. And that consciousness here is, we're not going in and out of consciousness and going in and out of making choices. That's not what's happening. What's happening is this process, ongoing process of awareness, of bringing things into focus and pushing them aside and asking yourself questions. And often when reading Leonard and talking to other objectivists, you get this idea of somehow there's this engine that starts with I choose, and then there's this, somehow the train is going down the track or something. And I don't think that's what's happening at all.
I don't
think
either.
this is I'm not saying you do.
Yeah, I don't either.
This is a unified process over time that gets chopped up. And once you get it chopped up, people go down rabbit holes all over the place and make errors. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes. And I think there's a parallel to moral principles in that, Ayn says moral principles are the means to the end. But if you're living a moral life, those moral principles are not just the means, they're also the ends. When you are seeking to live a moral life, the means and the end are one. And to have this, I call it a time slice perspective on things rather than life as a process or consciousness as a process. I think it's helpful, I think, in grasping what you're saying for the audience to hang on to that perspective.
Well, I don't know if you may or may not have done this, but if you've read Principles of Psychology by William James, 1890, the best book ever read, the best book ever written on psychology, 1890.
Nope.
There is a whole chapter that's called The Stream of Consciousness. And it's all about, and he says, among other things, he says, I don't know if I can quote exactly, but the idea of some kind of block-like idea or unitary idea that's not part of a stream is as mythical as the Jack of Spades, as James says. So you might enjoy that. I think it's right. I think sure there's absolutely a stream of consciousness. It occurs over a time period, and there's there's the middle of the stream where the focus is, and there's the kind of the edge where the fringe is, and that again that's a Jamesian distinction.
Okay.
There is a tiny bit of this distinction in objectivism, but very little.
Experience.
Yep. Sorry.
His immediate experience is like the Gestaltist. It's unitary. It's not broken. That confuses me.
Who are you talking about, Steve?
James,
James
defines immediate experience as a unitary thing. It's not in the it's not the immediate moment, but before and after. He calls it's like time is not going on, but it's a manifold like experience, from what I recall.
Well, anyway, there is a stream, and it's not like a sharp edge. Then you went out of focus again for a second. There's a stream. Unitary. It's not like there's a sharp, here's this thing, and then there's this next totally different thing, and there's like it's not like a sequence of snapshots. By the way, neither is perception. Perception is sometimes treated as if it were, a series of pictures, and as if a picture was a good model. Again, there's a certain philosopher who does this with the picture, as if that's a good model for perception. It's not. Perceptual consciousness is also a stream occurring over a time, and it's not a matter of a picture. So I think we're basically on the same. You might enjoy reading James, by the way, not his philosophy, which is of course horrible, his pragmatism, but it's the psychology in Principles, and also in the book called Talks to Teachers, which I mentioned before, is really very good. A lot of it is very good, and a lot of it has not been. In fact, psychology in some ways has gone backwards. The field.
I'll put it on the list.
Yeah, so you might enjoy that. Speaking of which, here's a couple of quotes to just read quickly here. Here's one from Ayn Rand. That which you call your soul or spirit is your consciousness, and that which you call free will is your mind's freedom to think or not. The only will you have, your only freedom, the choice that controls all the choices you make and determines your life and your character. That's from Atlas Shrugged, of course. That's John Galt's speech. And here's James. Our moral effort, properly so called, terminates in our holding fast to the appropriate idea. If then you are asked, in what does a moral act consist when reduced to its simplest and most elementary form? You can make only one reply. You can say that it consists in the effort of attention by which we hold fast to an idea which, but for that effort, would be driven out of the mind by the other psychological tendencies that are there. So you got something and there's a stream, but you can hold on to something in the stream, and that's important that you can do that. Let me finish the James quote. To think, in short, is the secret of will. So we have the notion of the idea of to think back from 1890. We have that idea, and you don't find it in many other sources. I think I found one other source or one or two, but generally speaking, when people talk about will, they're not as good in localizing it in the choice to think, which is where it should be. And then there's the other quote from Ayn Rand. I read this last time, but I think it's worth a quick look again in connection with the last thing I read from James about holding something in mind. Ayn Rand says, values set the psycho-epistemological rhythm or tempo of cognition. They make one hold a given percept or concept in mind long enough to integrate. See, holding it in mind. And what does that do? That activates knowledge, which is integrated into your thinking. That's what it does. Integration is what makes the thing or issue real. Thus, non-attention or non-retention is a matter of lack of values, and values have to be connected to action. An out-of-focus state may be a state of rushing past everything, psycho-epistemologically, while focus requires slowness. You got to hold on to something and give it time, and actually, of course, also ask questions about it. Ask yourself questions about it to activate the knowledge that you need to drive your thinking forward. Otherwise, you'll be stuck with an inning with only 3 outs, and many other similar problems. I have a lot of examples of that.
Well, the baseball I played, we only had 3 innings per outs, 1.5 for each team.
1.5 for team. Okay, well, I'm not sure how that would work, but all right.
That's the Martian version.
All right, so I think we ought to go back. Let me see if there's something else I really need to. I did want to emphasize that because this is something that Steve and I are interested in, that just trying harder, that mental effort of attention, is not sufficient for keeping your thinking moving forwards. That's not all you have to do. You have to, thinking requires material to work with, and that material has to be activated on a continuing basis. And some of that material your subconscious gives you automatically, but some of it doesn't. And then your ending will have 3 outs. You have to occasionally refuel that thinking and know how to do it. It's a skill of doing that, and that's the skill that Steve and I are I've taught it to some people, and we're working on teaching it to more. I think it's an important skill for school children to learn. It's what I call the skill of will, the skill of keeping your thinking going by activating knowledge is key. And a lot of students will, I've seen this a million times or 1,000 times anyway. They say to me, I'm trying to think, but nothing happens. Well, that's actually from Curly Howard of the Three Stooges. But students do the same thing. You see them there; they're trying to think. They're exerting mental effort. They are really trying, but they don't know how to direct it properly. That's the second part. And just because you do the first part, which is necessary, the act of exerting the mental effort of attention is a necessary feature of deriving thinking, but it's not sufficient. You have to have, among other things, you have to make sure that the thought process is fueled. It gets the cognitive fuel that it needs on a continuing basis. And we have ways of teaching that. That's another thing. One of these days, Ray, we'll have to get into that discussion too, since you're a longtime educator.
Yes, I spent 25 years working with young children and teaching them how to think, teaching them a set of skills to lead them. The way I always described it is that when you're working with children, you want to help them build a path in their own mind that they can walk to find the answers, rather than give them your own path. And walking down that path consists of a series of questions, a series of techniques, and along with a set of beliefs about one's own efficacy and so forth and so on. So that was my introduction into teaching children, and why I became a child, was precisely in engaging in that act, in helping a young third grade girl come to understand how to do what you and I as adults call borrowing and carrying in mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an earth-shattering epiphany about how the mind works, and led me into working with children.
I haven't used those words in ages. I just use a calculator. But I have some idea what you're talking about. Anyway, by the way, one of the sub-skills of the skill of will that we have been working on is introspection. Introspection is actually a teachable skill to students of pretty much all ages, almost all ages, and is essential for the proper direction of volitional attention. You need to, anyway, I won't go down that path further right now. That's a long discussion, but that's something that's missing. There is no explicit instruction in introspection in any school that I know of, including Montessori. It's done under the table by the better teachers will transfer that by talking about their own thought process, by modeling their own thought processes. They will do it implicitly, but there is no explicit instruction. They do have something called metacognition, which is not quite the same thing. It's a pale imitation of what introspection actually is. Anyway, so that's what we're interested in getting into the schools, and I think that if we're going to turn the society around, if this culture is going to go start moving forwards instead of backwards, which we have been moving for a long time now, it's going to start with those kinds of. I think it's going to start with developing those kinds of skills better in children and also in older students. You know, we can only hope that we have enough time to do that. And I'll leave it at that for now. Okay, so we're getting time marches on here. I did want to get back to the chapter. You want to comment further, Ray? Did you have something else you want to?
Not at all.
Okay,
there.
All right. Let's go back to OPAR. And there is a chapter on, well, it's not a chapter, it's a subchapter, page 69. Volition is axiomatic. And I think this is a very important topic, the idea here. In Objectivism originally, way back in the old days, this was called the contradiction of determinism, this issue. Volition became an axiom in Objectivism. According to my research staff, it happened like around 1976 with a Peikoff lecture. But it became axiomatic without, I don't think there was any real commentary. It wasn't said, well, we've now figured out that it's an axiom. It just started being referred to that way. And it's axiomatic in this sense. That's the contradiction of determinism argument that makes it axiomatic. It's axiomatic in the sense that any attempt to deny free will of necessity use free will. When somebody says free will is not true, they're saying it's not true rather than false, and they are basically saying that they can make a judgment that something is true rather than false, and a deterministic entity can't make such judgments. If you're determined, you are forced to believe, you're compelled to believe what you believe by whatever the antecedent causes happen to be. That might be your economic class if it's Marxism. It might be your conditioning history if it's behaviorism. It might be your toilet training or something if it's psychoanalysis. It could be anything like that, but you are forced to believe whatever by the causal factors that influence you, regardless of their relation to what's true. So you have to believe under determinism. If you are a determined entity, you have to believe what you believe because the causes determine it, and those causes will in general have no necessary relation to truth. Somebody could argue, and I've had people argue this actually, that their causes are logic, that you are determined by logic or determined by the facts to believe what you believe. But that would not take into account the fact that we make mistakes, that error exists. The existence of error, I think, is a very important thing to keep in mind in understanding this point about volition as inescapable, is that we do make mistakes. I do think if there were some entity that had a perfect program such that it never could make a mistake, it would never make a mistake, that's Ray. Okay. So Ray does not need to have free will. It's totally unnecessary for him. However, I don't really think. I think if you had that program, I'm going to be doubting that you do, because in order to contain that program, your head would have to be extremely big, and you'd be dragging it on the floor all the time. And I don't think your head is big enough to contain that program. But maybe there's some way. But anyway, for us regular mortals who actually do make mistakes, free will is a necessity for objectivity because it gives us the ability to do self-correction. I think that's an important point that isn't usually emphasized enough in this connection, that free will is, among other things, the ability to self-correct open-endedly. Yes, you could have a programmed a robot or a computer could be programmed to do some self-correction, but it could only self-correct in in the way that the program allows it to self-correct or enables it to self-correct, and be limited by that. There still could be an error in that self-correction program, and then you'd be stuck. So no deterministic system can have open-ended self-correction, and we can. That's what free will gives us. That is why I believe, anyway, that is why chatbots are ultimately unreliable. Why they're very valuable. The chat. I don't know about you, Ray, but Steve and I use Gemini. Steve doesn't like Gemini. What do you use, Steve?
I like Gemini. I like them.
Okay,
I like a
I
lot of
thought you
them.
said you didn't like
Depends.
Gemini because it kept cutting you
It's
off too quickly.
terse.
But
It's
anyway,
too
I
terse
used
sometimes.
whatever one. There are plenty of them out there now, and they're very valuable. I consider a chatbot to be, in effect, a an external subconscious. It's an extra subconscious, and it has a lot of stuff to draw on. It has the whole internet or whatever its base happens to be to draw upon, and it's very valuable. But they also give you sometimes ludicrous pieces of information because they really can't distinguish. They really can't really distinguish between true and false. They can distinguish between popular and unpopular. They have the ability that they're like an ultimate Peter Keating of second-handedness. They can do that well. They can do that, and so they survey what they have, and if they have a widespread agreement, they'll tell you it's true, and probably it's most of the time it is true, but some of the time it's going to be false, and often just ludicrously false. So you still have to use. There still has to be a human with free will in the picture, and I think that's always going to be true unless artificial intelligence is able to somehow produce consciousness and free will, which nobody has the slightest idea how to do. If that ever happens, then let's see. But until that happens, there's still no matter how good AI gets, there's still an important role for consciousness in a human being and free will in a human being, and we will not be put out of business by the machines. That's my view of that situation. Yeah, Dr. Peikoff says, by the way, in the chapter, the volition is axiomatic section, he says, an infallible being one that automatically, what page am I on? 70. And the paragraph starts, an infallible being, one that automatically grasps the truth, such as an animal on its own level. I don't know about that, or an angel, if such existed. So I guess that means raise an angel. And by the way, devils are angels too. They used to be angels, so they became. So you might,
they're fallen. They're fallen.
They're
angels.
fallen angels. Yes,
yes,
just so.
Yes.
So let's keep that in mind here. Anyway, an angel, if it such existed, can be devoid of volition yet still acquire knowledge. So he's agreeing with me. I agree, or I'm agreeing with him, that if you had a deterministic entity that couldn't make mistakes, it would be to have knowledge. But we who can make mistakes have to apply a systematic method, a volitional method of objectivity in order to validate our knowledge. Man must think in a reality-oriented manner, and the commitment to do so is observably not inbuilt in most of us anyway. Okay. I want to just want to do one more. Want to go a little bit past chapter 2, and then maybe summarize a couple of things, and then we'll stop, or I'll ask for comments from the other guys. If you just go over to the next chapter, which is called Concept Formation, page 73, I want to make one comment there about the first paragraph. For man, sensory material. Now, I want to do a little cognitive refueling here. Stop for a second, slow down. What is that anyway? What does he mean by sensory material? What exactly does that consist of? Sensations are sensory material, I would say, but are perceptions sensory material? I don't know. I'm not sure what it's being referred to here. That word material, which also appears in the objectivist definition of reason, is a little unclear to me anyway. I'm not sure what it is. But anyway, he starts, for sensory material is only the first step of knowledge, the basic source of information. Until he has conceptualized this information, man cannot do anything with it cognitively, nor can he act on it. Human knowledge and human action are conceptual phenomena. I would say in response to this, that there is such a thing as perceptual knowledge, that both humans and even animals have and can act on it. Concepts are condensations of that knowledge. They're not additions or supplementations to it. That's more the Kantian view of the way the mind works. They are condensations. It's very important, I think, to realize that there is such a thing as perceptual knowledge. You can perceive that you can walk through a doorway. You can perceive that a certain surface is flat, as opposed to, or that a ball is round. That is a perceptually given fact, and it's a fact of reality. It's not a fact contributed by your senses. Balls are round whether you detect that fact through vision or through touch. Either way, what you detect is that they are round. That's an actual, I use the term objective, which is, it's not really the right usage in objectivism, but it's an independently existing fact of reality, and that fact can be perceived. And it's not just, so we don't just know, our knowledge is not limited to conceptual phenomena, in my opinion, anyway. Okay, let's see, either one of you want to comment on that?
You just sounded like John Searle. Those last 10 or 15 words.
Sometimes John Searle's okay. It's pretty good. Not always, but sometimes John Searle's pretty good. Yeah. It's also something along the lines of Gibson, right? But he would say that. All right. So I want to take a minute. We've been through several sessions now about the Anteroom, and I just want to summarize a few points that I want to make about that material. I'm not summarizing the chapters at all. We haven't been trying to do that in any sense, but some points. One is that there is a phenomenon that people call form of perception. Objectivists call form of perception, definitely a phenomenon, but I say that is not form of perception at all. It's not a perceptual phenomenon. It's form of sensation. It is sensory experiences that you may experience together. So there's some integration, but there's sensory experiences, not perceptual ones. Those experiences are not how we perceive. It's how we don't perceive. When you see the coin on its edge, see, Ray never does this either. When you see the coin on its edge and you're thinking to yourself, that's elliptical. That's not perception. That's a form of sensation. And if you confuse that with perception, which Ray never does, if you do that confusion, but philosophers do this as well as ordinary people, that's where you get illusions and mistakes. Things that are called perceptual mistakes in some quarters are actually, at least in many cases, confusing form of sensation with actual perceptions, confusing form with object. So if I look through the Ames room and see two people as being the same height, that is a sensory impression from a particular point of view. When you actually get to perceive by moving around, you'll see one is taller than the other. Or if you perceive, if you look and see the railroad tracks as meeting, a little perception will actually disabuse you of that. But if you confuse that with a perception, that experience, then you will get what's called a misperception. But a misperception, as I say, is actually confusing form of sensation with object of perception. That's what it really amounts to, in my view.
Or insufficient information leads to ambiguity. Gibson might
Yeah,
say.
it's insufficient information, but in addition to insufficient, see, if you just had insufficient information, if that's all you'd had, if that was the only thing, then you wouldn't experience anything. You wouldn't experience it incorrectly because you have no experience. But in addition to having insufficient information, we also do have sensation. Sensory experiences are mixed with perceptual experiences all the time. And the errors I'm saying are caused by confusing one with the other, confusing the sensory experiences with the perceptual ones. That's where the trouble arises, or as I said, confusing form of sensation with object of perception. Okay, another just summarizing point. We talked about this along the way, that I'm claiming that perception is not the integration of sensations. That's unfortunately, that's the Kantian view, and in a different way, that's the objectivist view. But I'm, say, following Gibson, rather than saying it's integration of sensation, it's detection. It's a process of detection. It's not putting things together. Integration, you do not have to integrate the world. The world is already put together the way it is. You just have to detect it the way it is. It's not necessary. Integration is a conceptual phenomenon, not a perceptual one. And so it's the extraction of invariance in the flow of stimulus energy that occurs over time by an active perceiver. That's how we get perception. You don't have to integrate what's already together, just detect it. So perception is more like what a Geiger counter does or what a radio receiver does. And there are other, analogies you can make. Concepts need to be integrated, not perceptions. And then last, I'm suggesting that volition is like a vector, has these two parts that are different conceptually, but inseparable in action. When you exert mental effort, you always have to exert mental effort on a particular object. There is no generic focus switch that you can flick and suddenly put you into focus about everything in the world, either perceptually or conceptually. Volition is the mental effort of attention directed to a particular object. Okay, with that, anything else you guys want to? I don't know what's going to happen. We haven't decided. I'm kind of, we'll see about what's going to win the next cutting edge. We may take a break here unless one of these, I feel like taking a bit of a break after this long series on the
Adventures in the
Anteroom.
Anteroom.
But we'll decide that shortly. And Ray may have a different idea, for example. I hope he does.
Well,
Anything else? Yeah.
I do have a couple of technical comments that are really background as opposed to dealing with the points that you've brought up, Lee.
All right.
So these are addressed to what I think of as beginning objectivists, although you'll find long-term objectivists also have these sorts of questions. The subtitle of this section is Volition is Axiomatic. So when I see that, the question that comes to my mind right away is he referring to axiomatic concepts, or is he referring to axioms, which are propositions?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
In Ito, you often see this, it's not an ambiguity, but an axiomatic concept is not an axiom. That's a proposition. So
Yeah.
it's never clear here to me what is he saying it's an axiomatic concept.
Well, let's take that up right away, because I think I can answer that. I would give it this is the following answer. He says axiomatic, that's an adjective. So it could, go either way. I would say, yeah, it's an axiomatic concept. Because it's just as you said, it's not, free will is not there. You could formulate a proposition,
right?
But free will or volition is because the concept's supposed to be one word. But anyway, that's an axiomatic concept.
Right.
If you formulate it as a proposition, then it's an axiom as a proposition. So we probably shouldn't get too worried here.
No, it's not an issue of being worried. It's an issue of what's going on in a book that claims to be a statement of objectivism.
Yeah.
That's, to me, that's a serious issue, because it's important, because in here he does not say, this is an axiomatic concept, now let's turn it into a proposition. So that's just one issue. The second issue is something else that you said at the end there. You talked about the integration of sensations into percept as an objectivist view. And I'm going to disagree with you on that in this sense. And this, again, is, I think, an error with OPAR, in that the topic of sensations being integrated or not integrated into percept, so the whole topic is a non-philosophic topic. And therefore, it is not part of objectivism. Objectivism is a set of philosophic principles. Objectivism is not a theory of the science of sensation. Objectivism is not a theory of psychology. And I, for one, am highly puzzled, to tell you the honest truth, as opposed to the dishonest truth, of why half of this stuff is even in this particular chapter, rather than simply. Now, let me back up. Now, you could say that, the idea of sensations being integrated into percepts is a Randian idea, just like Ayn Rand had a theory of time and space. She had a theory of masculinity and femininity. She had a theory of sexuality. She had a theory of money. And they may be true or false. That's not the issue. But none of them are part of objectivism. And I think many people who come to these conversations and come to listening to this get very wrapped up into misunderstanding what philosophical principles are versus what is science versus what is legal theory. And you end up with lots of people running around calling themselves objectivists. And apparently they are automatically scholars in history, in physiology, in constitutional thought, without having any background whatsoever in anything of this. And I find it very frustrating. So this is just me venting, really. in a sense, but pointing out that a lot of what's in this chapter is not objectivism, because it's not philosophy.
Yeah, okay. I have an answer to this too, I think.
I bet you do.
First of all, from my standpoint,
everything, Lee.
perception is in my, in my background. I don't
Yes.
consider myself to be a really good expert in perception because it hasn't been my focus in thinking over my lifetime. But I did study with the best perception psychologist of all time. And I spent a lot of time with him, and I know something about that. So I don't worry about that issue. But the issue whether it's part of objectivism, yeah, it's not. It is more in the scientific realm. But some of these things are kind of, first of all, some of these things are kind of borderline. Kant has a theory which is very similar to Ayn Rand's theory, or not the objective, whatever you want to call it, the Randian, if you want to call it that. Is Kant acting as a scientist? Maybe. But he says perception is the integration of sensation by the mind. Ayn Rand says perception is the integration of sensation by the brain. Now, I asked Dr. Peikoff, I think I talked about this, but anyway, I'm going to talk about it again. I asked Dr. Peikoff, where did this idea come from? Where did you get the idea from? And I expected to hear something about the science, but he said, Ayn Rand told it to me. So that, of course, simply leads to the question of where did she get it? And we can only speculate. I have a feeling myself that she got it from Nathaniel Branden, who took some half-assed course on perception at NYU, because he doesn't know anything about that, didn't know anything about that stuff. He's a clinical guy. But anyway, or there's one legit, I'm sorry, that's not totally fair. There's one guy in objectivism who actually knew quite a bit about perception. One guy and one guy only, and that's Robert Efron. And Robert Efron's article on what is perception is quite good. It's not as good as it could be if he knew about Gibson, but it's actually a pretty good article. And so, he's an exception. And his article about biology without consciousness, which is in the Objectivist, is quite good generally. So he knew something about these basic matters, and they're scientific. But the reason I'm not too concerned about making that hard, I like to make that distinction for this reason. Since I disagree, since I think the theory in objectivism is wrong, I don't want to have to fight the issue of am I an objectivist or not an objectivist? That issue is pointless to argue about. So I'm perfectly happy to call it science. But the problem with just leaving it with science is it may be just science, but it has philosophical implications. Because if you understand that the theory of sensation-based perception, which is common to Kant and objectivism in different forms. If you understand that it's wrong, you will understand immediately that Kant is cut off at the knees. You don't have to have any complicated argumentation about the identity of consciousness, the stuff that objectivism goes through to refute Kant. It's much simpler. Kant's perception theory is wrong, and therefore his entire basis for formulating a theory of the two worlds, a phenomenal noumenal world, is lost. He can't do it. That phenomenal world arises only because he has a sensation-based theory of perception. And once you get rid of that, it's over. And I don't even have to have technical knowledge of Kant, which I don't, and I don't want, and to be able to do that much. So to expunge Kant, you can do it if you understand the issue which is being called scientific here. So that's why I don't want to just throw this out with the proverbial bathwater. I don't care if you don't want to call it objectivism. That's okay with me, because like I said, that prevents a kind of pointless argument. So I'm fine with that, but I do want to use it. I do want to talk about it and use it.
Of course.
And it does actually. This bears some further thought. I haven't really worked out the implications of this, but the thing is, it does have philosophical implications, or it seems to me it does.
Yeah,
so how does that work? Okay.
Well, the real essence that perhaps I wasn't as clear as I could be is the focus always needs to be on the truth, rather than,
of course.
Rather than I'm not saying you disagree. I'm just saying that there are people who are focused on the word objectivist as opposed to being focused on the word truth and reality. And I'll just leave it. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
They know who they know who they are.
Well,
Well,
I'm going to disagree
Steve,
with
go ahead.
Ray
Yeah, sorry, Steve.
as well. I want to say this is how studying the history of perception for me has been like. There is the psychology of perception, there is the science of perception, and there is the philosophy of perception. And the philosophers, of which I'm not, have not given full reign over to the scientists or the psychologists because they have the ultimate veto power. It's still controversial. So that's why we discuss it. It's not like you demarcate, okay, this is a scientific issue, we're done with it. That's not how it works. That's all. That's what I wanted to say, because it's, I see when you call this, a scientific matter, I'm not a scientist either, but I'm interested in what is perception. Mm-hmm. And you do not get a solid answer from anyone but Gibson.
I agree with that.
Reading.
Right.
Okay, so are we going to wrap?
We're going to go off to. Are we going? Is Daniel here? We're going to go off to the Zoom room.
Yep, I think that's right. So we'll be back when we find
anybody.
out.
You're going to give the URL in the chat or something, Daniel. Is that available to people?
Yes, you put it in.
Okay, yeah.
So
we
we'll
can
see you
continue
next time. And
this particular discussion or any other one that anybody wants to bring up, we will continue in the Zoom room.
In the anteroom of Zoom.
Yep.